This week, I wear some black nitrile gloves, smell some Das clay, and piss around with a black pen. Let's get to it. So here we are on the basic video. This is going to be a 3-part series where we look at part 1, which will be sculpting, part 2 will be painting, part 3 will be the final assembly, shading where we need it, and weathering the model into the thing. So the first thing we're going to need is to open this Das clay. Das clay, it's a funny thing. It's an air dry clay, so the number one trick here is to make sure you don't get any cracks in the finish, and the way you do that is by drying it slowly. So you don't want to put it in the airing cupboard, you don't want to put it in a nice warm room where everything's nice and warm. After I'd finished sculpting, I put it in the coldest place in the house, which is under the stairs in the dark cupboard. So I'm just checking the consistency, making sure it's nice and soft, and it is. What you don't want is a hard clay. If it's hard, then it's starting to dry. So the base itself is an MDF disc. It's about 1.5 centimeters thick, slightly beveled, but that doesn't matter. And 10 inches round. So we'll squeeze out the clay. See what we're working with. So we'll move the knight into position, and we'll start to have a quick look at what we're doing. We have some pieces of scenery these are from Conquest. I can't remember which actual kit it is, but the ruins can go in here. And we're going to have him sort of stood in a ruined building. So we'll bring out the other pieces. This one has an actual door on it. And we'll try and look at getting him looking like a natural ruin that he's in. And if any of you are long-time watchers of my streams, you'll notice that this is half of the cargo container which we painted up on stream. I've just cut it in half diagonally, so it looks like it's embedded into the ground and it's been there for a while. Apologies at this point because I noticed that the light is in frame in the bottom corner, but that will disappear as the video goes on, and we'll change our zoom level. So I'm thinking, okay, we're going to have him off center a little bit just so we can have a scene at the front to see exactly what we're doing. But look, we're looking at either putting them along the same angle as though it's two buildings next to one another and that's a passage in between, or at 90-degree angles to try and get something that works. And at this point we're just playing around, getting everything positioned. I mean, if you're doing something similar, it's always handy to have a look and work things out. I've got some barrels as well, we'll stick some of those in. At the moment it just looks a bit terrible, and as this is a voiceover, we'll soon see how this changes. But as we can see, there's no way this knight will be able to get in that gap, so you got to think about it logically. How would he get into the position he's in the base? Again, he wouldn't be able to get in there. So I'm going to try and further back. See, because you'll be able to get over that little ruin. That's not an issue. But if we're wanting to have a scene, we need to make sure that we've got something that makes a bit more sense. And I'm thinking this does currently. So you could see he could have walked in from the back, stood there, aimed to his right and started shooting. And we're starting to get how the scene's going to appear, because I'm quite happy with the rough layout there. These are some pieces of bendable resin cables from Zinj Industries. They're quite good. Add a bit of ground clutter. Use a couple of barrels as well. We're trying to work out a best position from those. One of the things I'm thinking is I'd like one to be like sort of stood up against the cargo container, and this piece here is from a submarine kit. It's just a random. Well, I think it was from the conning tower of a 172nd submarine, but we're just going to use it propped up against this the cargo container just to add a bit more interest from that side. And I cut some of these bits up. These are actually the Mechanicus terrain. They're from the Renegades box set. I just cut one in half and I'm going to embed that into the ground as well. Just work it out. I think I eventually put it around the back near his left foot. So again, I'm still not fully decided where it's going to go at this point. And yeah, these are like plasma generator battery things. The story that's forming in my mind at this point is how about the night's come to a stop, the driver's got out, and he's investigating these energy pod things. So I'll position them against the side of this ruin. This one's got a cable, and we'll just feed it into this sort of power station in the side of the wall, like a fuse box. So now we're getting a bit more of a story growing. Some more cables, we'll just fire those around the back as well, I think. So again, we're just assessing the scene, making sure it's all making a bit more sense. And yeah, now we're thinking of, if we just have a clay base, it's going to look a little bit flat, so we need to start introducing some elements to it, some hardscape. So I like to use slate a lot, because slate has many different stratas, which make it seem more believable at scale, rather than just getting random rocks from the garden. Slate's a really nice thing. I know some people use bark, chipped bark, you know, the stuff you see around plants in some gardens, and that stuff's really good. Just a random armour plate will embed into the ground as well around the back, I think. So I think we're about ready to start doing some sculpting. And the sculpting's not difficult. The way I do my bases is actually what I'm doing here is taking a photo, so just so I can refer to it later on, because as soon as we take all these pieces off, we need to be able to remember roughly how our base is going to look. So it's always handy to take a picture of your mock-up so you can refer to it later, especially if you're really happy with how it's looking. So here I'm just going to draw around his feet just so I know where he's going to be stood and all the elements. And I quickly realised, you know what, when we get the clay down, we're not going to see most of this, so the photograph will help a lot in knowing where things are. But just indulge me while I attempt to make a plan in my head, and it's obviously not the best idea. The longer I can keep this fresh in my mind as I'm sculpting, the more I'll be able to iterate on it in my mind and get it exactly how I want it, because I think some of the barrels do eventually move. So here we go. Get the work area nice and clean, and on with the clay. So some people, when they're doing bases, especially smaller bases, they'll put a layer of PVA down, which that's fine. I'm just sticking some water on here just to wet the surface, because the clay is just going to stick to this. It's going to be fine. The surface is slightly rough enough that it will adhere to it. Like the bit of clay that we've got on there, I can see just by the way it's working, it's not going anywhere. It's going to be fine. So we'll just wet that area a little bit, and now we'll get the clay on and squeeze it out. Now Das clay, if you've ever worked with Das clay, really does smell. So I want to get some gloves out just so it doesn't make my hands really, really stink. And it also has the benefit of making sure there's going to be no fingerprints on the clay. So I'll attempt to get the gloves on. The most time-consuming part of any build, getting the gloves on. Alright, I think we're nearly ready. Yep, there we go. Just sort them out. Right. Break a big chunk of clay off and we'll just throw it down the middle. Now the pen I used was permanent marker, so I can still see the lines through. I haven't just washed them all off and wasted 5 minutes, it's okay. As you can see, it's a nice wet sticky clay. Get rid of that bit of metal from the casing. The bag. And actually in the live audio, which I'm also listening through while I record this voiceover, I'm busy complaining about the smell of Das clay at this point. It's not nice. So that amount will do. It'll give us a nice amount to start. And I'm just going to start smudging it down, laying it down flat onto the base, just so it's not going to go anywhere. At this point, we're not worried about, you know, the final texture. All we want is to push it down onto the thing so it doesn't go anywhere. Now, there's always the risk when you're working with a large area of clay, especially when it's thick, that not only will it crack, but it will lift off. So that's just why it's a little bit wet on the base, just so we can shove it all in there and for it to sort of make a little bit of a slip in between the surface. And you can see that on the far right. So yeah, you're just squidging it down. May need a little bit more water soon. But we're not worried about the form of anything. That'll all come as soon as we get our base in position. There we go, ribbing it in flat. The thickest it is about 1 centimetre thick, and those two areas are the areas where the feet go, and you'll see I'll build those areas up. Because I'm not going to pin this, I'm just going to glue it down. That way, if there is an accident, we're not going to snap any of the joints in the legs, it'll just come off at the feet. Just has a little bit more safety. It's never going to be, you know, mishandled or thrown about, this model, because it's a giant base and a giant model. It's mostly just going to be for display, just in case it does go into battle and then there's an accident and it gets knocked. We don't want any of the joints to snap, so this way it will just come off at the base and we can just reattach it again. And because we're doing a Mars base, it helps with the visualization having this orange clay. I know Das clay can come in two colours. It can come in like a grey or a terracotta, but this is fine for what we want. And as we're going to be painting it anyway, it helps a bit. So we've nearly got coverage. I'm going to move all these lumps in just to fill that hole up. A rolling pin would have been handy, but in hindsight, we don't have it. Here we go, put a little bit more water down. It's just dirty water from my paint thing. It doesn't need to be clean water for this. And then we're just going to fill this last piece in here. So these areas here is for where the feet are going to go roughly. Remember, I do have the picture to refer to. This is just going to fill that bottom edge in. Make a sausage. Push it down. Now, in an ideal world, I wouldn't have any clay overhanging that beveled edge, just so when I come to paint the edge, it's nice and neat. There are two ways that I like to do bases. Number one is I would continue on like a Games Workshop beveled base. I like to continue that beveled angle upwards. So if there's any like raised or mountainous areas, then they will intersect that bevel nicely and have a nice sort of almost a cutaway effect. But on this, which doesn't have that, and the sides are just straight up and then a 45-degree angle, in an ideal world that would be nice and clean, and we could just rim that with some silver, because I like to do my Martian bases with a silver base rather than either a black or just a Martian colour, especially when it's a knight, something a bit more giant. So here we go, just pushing in the deepest areas of this base at the moment. We have probably looking on nearly an inch at those points. Now it is just rough, so as long as we get some connection there, and again we're just going to push it all in. Here we go, improvising. The bottom of the Imperial Knight feet is now being replaced by a Citadel paint holder, but it gives us a good base for the solid section in the bottom of the foot. Now we'll have to push areas out for the toes, but it's a good starting point. And here I am consciously thinking about that edge, just trying to make it as neat as I can. Right, got sick of those gloves. Now I've got like a little water spray here from Derwent, which might come in handy when we're wanting to just push some of that clay around just to make it stop getting a bit dry. So we'll move them in and see whether we get our positions right, and we have roughly got our position okay. I'm just going to push them down. I think I loosen one of the knee plates here, but it's not a big job to put it back on. So now we've got like a footprint that we can work from and build out. You'll see around this edge shortly. Now put in the other parts, see if you can remember how they roughly went. Again, we'll push them in, make an impression. And here I'm looking for that rough 90-degree angle. Now there's one extra piece in the terrain here which I haven't got out yet, but I'm starting to think it's going to need something down this side where I'm pushing all that flat. And I'm thinking it needs some sort of a floor. We briefly looked at the slate pieces earlier on, and I'm thinking, so if we have them slate steps, we need it to go somewhere. We need him to have an area for the man to be perched on, because there's no point in going around the back because it'd make no narrative sense. See where we're pushing in some plates that I mentioned earlier, just as random scatter. We'll put the clay over the top so it looks like it's embedded in the ground, as though it's been there for a long time. So we need to build these toes up. So we'll move them out of the way because we can see roughly where the toes go. And now we just need to like push the push the clay in place. Now, I did mention that I didn't want fingerprints, but apparently I've decided, you know what, fingerprints will be fine because we're putting a lot of scatter over the top. Not only scatter, we'll be putting different paints and pigment, so we should be fine. So I'm just going to push these out into the cross shape. One thing I also like to do on my knights is have them raised up. So if any of you have seen my Questoris knights, you'll see that they're all probably about 2 centimeters raised on the base. It just gives them a bit more presence on the battlefield. And because I've done that on every single one, it would be crazy if I didn't do it on this one, only because he would look a lot shorter than he naturally is. Right, we'll start to add some texture into the ground. Now the way I do this is take some of those slate and I just push it in. Like I said, slate has good texture, so it's really handy. Let's push him back in place to make sure he's going to be okay. I think roughly we've got him in place now. We just need to tidy up those joins, just so it doesn't look like he's stood on clay. I'm just pointing underneath the base to make sure that there's enough space in there for us to get some epoxy glue in. So using the back end of a file just to push the clay in and around the toes. Not worried about any sort of texture here, this is all just moving the clay so his toes make sense, make sure there's no gaps underneath them. This is although it's going to be hopefully the weak point of the structural support, the feet to the base. Like I said, if it falls over then I want it to break here. We are using epoxy, but it'll be epoxy on top of paint, so hopefully that will just lift the paint up and it'll come off, but it should have enough stiction to be fine. So again, just pushing it around these toes. And the left leg. Get all that clay pushed in there. I think we're about sorted. So the whole base is starting to take shape now. Give it a bit of a wobble. Let's get him out the way. That's giving us a much better indication of where the feet are going to go. And from that we can build on. Just make sure it doesn't dry out a bit. Give it a bit of a spray of just water. Probably didn't need to do it. It's quite a humid and cold room at the moment. But here we go with our slate. So we're just going to start having a look at just building in some rough texture. Now I recommend people do this a lot when they're doing bases. I know you can use the pins, the rolling pins, to get like cobblestone and stuff, but you get a much more natural shape if you can just stamp natural rocks in place. Now try and vary the position and the angle and the pressure of all your work with the stones. There I was just angling not angling, but outlining their toes, making sure that we don't lose any definition on that connection when we start doing our texture work. And that's one of the things I'm just checking now, making sure that anything I've just pushed down isn't making a mess. There we go, there's the thigh pad coming off, but it's just easy to glue back on. So here we go, just pushing in the slate, making some rough texture. Again, we don't want to push down too much here, just in case we lose connection between the toes and the ground. But we're starting to get our natural Martian landscape sorted. So I've got a couple of different ones. You don't want to always use the same piece because you'll end up seeing repetition. But my concern was short-lived because I quickly decided we're going to use some natural stones and sand over the top. I'm still not happy with that front section at this point. It's running through my mind and I need to do something with it. The piece I'm currently working on. Here we go, here's the decision being made. So I'm currently ratcheting through my box for some landscape pieces. I discover the exact piece I'm looking for, and it's the walkways from the Mechanicus. I don't like going in with a full idea of what I'm wanting to do with any project. Because although plans are really good to make, if you spend too long doing a plan, then any project can become really bogged down in the process. Now, if any of you watch me, you'll know that that's not the way I work. It's a lot more fluid. I have a rough idea of what I want to get to. But you may have better ideas as you go along. And if you stick regimentally to a plan, this process in your mind of iterating and finding a solution as you're going along, you lose that. So here we are looking at the floor. Plan number 1, can we use it as a stamp? So I'll stamp it in the ground. I'll look at it and go, you know what, I don't like it, it's rubbish. It's a negative. It's obviously a negative. And it's not going to work. It doesn't take me long to realise that why don't I just stick it on and then cut the edge off? That's exactly what I've just decided. We're going to cut away the clay, stick the floor actually down to the MDF base, and then we'll just use a saw to cut it right off. Here we go, get the knife out. Don't mind that little bit of clay that's in there, we can use that as like a dust covering. And hopefully we should just be able to peel it back. I'm just going to glue it right in. So there's a few little nubs underneath which are there from when I ripped it off the other connector. So we'll just cut those with some clippers. Make sure there's not going to be any sort of a mess underneath. Got to use some super glue underneath it. Find the glue. Here we go, we're going to use just some, what are we on here? Yeah, thick super glue, the best. Thick super glue is really good for joining parts, thin super glue is good for wicking into areas. Because there's a lot of moisture down here already, this shouldn't take very long to dry. There we go. So the rest of this build especially is going to be dealing with that, basically a plank out in the open. So now I'm thinking, okay, so we need a bit more natural join here between the ground and that platform. So I'm just going to push this bit of spare clay that we've cut up over the top as though the soil and the muck is sort of blown in over the platform. and it works quite well, especially when it's painted up. It also gives an area to stick the steps of what's the word? Slate over the top. Just making sure this bit of muck that's underneath the wall is extending over as well. I want to keep it natural. And because we're wanting to put those power cells in, we've now got a little scene at the front, a little diorama for those power cells to go in nicely. So first of all, making a bit of texture, just deciding exactly how I'm going to do this. Here we go, I'm bedding them in now, making the steps. As though it's not natural rock, it's like rubble from the whatever building was there. And the next one. I'm actually running out of slate now. I think I've used all my best pieces on this, so I'll have to go and hammer up some more. I live in an area where there's a lot of natural slate, so it's quite abundant here. Just got to be careful when working with it because it can be quite sharp. There we go, forming some natural rock texture in the mud. So roughly we're getting an idea of how it's going to be. All these plastic parts have been mostly cleaned up. All the mould lines have been hacked away at. So we'll work on this little section around here. Stick our barrels and stuff in, I think we do at this point. First of all, we need to prepare the land, make sure it's nice and natural looking and doesn't just look like fingerprints. So again, we'll just tap in some texture. I think this piece of slate is actually a roof tile, hence why there's a big circle in it. And it's difficult to see what exactly I'm doing up there, but there's a bit of a join I just wanted to tidy up between just where that right inside toe is and the box. Yeah, don't want any flint. Flint, it doesn't have enough texture. I'm looking for a piece of rock that's got some texture. And here I have a bit of, it's actually iron. Is it iron ore slag? Or is it, no, it's particulate, so it's a sandstone of some sort. But it's got a nice rough texture, so I just use that a little bit. I think it snaps at some point, so it's not quite as good as the slates, but it's doing a job. And here we go with the first bit of sand. So this stuff is, I live about 4 or 5 miles from the coast, and we don't have nice sandy beaches. We have lots of shale and coarse sand and rocks and gravel. Now I think I've shown some people my sand box, as it were, on stream before. It's dried, it's heated in the oven just to kill anything, and yeah, just push it all into the surface. All different types. I don't like to use, let's say, like aquarium sand, because it's all the same. What's it called? The same thickness. So this is a lot more natural. Just acts as rubble base, really. So I'm just going to push it in. Make sure it sort of sticks. Now, this won't just stick naturally. What you're going to have to do to make this stick is use like a PVA water mix over the top, and any sand particles, the water will either sink into the clay naturally and dry, or the PVA, well, it will do that, and then the PVA will be left, and it will just glue it in. It won't like do a nice glossy surface over the top and destroy all the details because it's watered down and so thin, but it will stick all this rubble down nicely. So we'll spin it round, do the next part again with our stamps. Just wet the area a little bit. I probably didn't need to do it. The wetter your surface is, the more mud-like your stamping will be. But it was very hot when I was doing this. As you can see, the clay around the very edge is already dry. Stamps are the way though. If you can get yourself some nice natural stamps. Even bark I suppose would work, but you just got to make sure it doesn't stick fully. Okay, so this is where I put the broken fence part. I'm just going to stick it in because it's not really going to be a major part of the diorama base. So I just want to stick it in there, forget about it, put that submarine part in up against the corner of that box. Doing that means we don't have to really paint the box as much because the box is painted on the sides, which are visible, but the top and bottom are still currently very, very basic, and I think just undercoat. So the more we can sort of forget that that's a problem, the better. Again, stick some more sand and stones down. There's actually a piece of sprue there, so I've got rid of. And dump some in. We don't even have to pat it all down at this point, just keep it loose because the PVA glue mix will keep it in place. Again, just get it positioned as I want it. And just fill the back area up with more rubble. Cleaning up that edge a little bit. Pushing the little bits of stone in, making sure it's all in place. Move it round, work on the next section. Now I'm thinking again at this point, this whole back area, what I'm going to put here. And I come up with an idea of, okay, so we need to get the ground prepared. But I'm thinking in my mind, I need some sort of detail, and the way I do that is I have a roll of scaled barbed wire. So in my mind I'm thinking, okay, I can run this barbed wire right across under his feet and make him look like he sort of stood on there. So I'm not going to do too much of this area. I'm just going to push that stone in, prepare it, and get ready for the barbed wire. To use some more power cables as well, just working out where I want them. So you just embed those under the surface, so it looks like it's, you know, appeared from an underground working. And with our rock, we're just going to push in some texture. Try and get it look as natural as possible. And there we go. Stick all the rubble and the sand down. Spinning around again. There's a fairly large area in the middle there, which is why I'm thinking of where can we put a barrel, just to try and fill that in a little bit. I know we're going to put some barbed wire of some sort in there, but at this point I haven't decided exactly how I'm going to do it yet. So I'm just looking at the barrel I've got, just doing a little bit of sanding on it because I noticed a seam line. Thinking, do you want to stick it down here? It's a bit too edgy if we stick it here though. So I decided we'll put it at the back. There we go. So we're starting to fill that in, making a bit more of a scene. And I realised that we put one barrel in, plenty of space for the next one. And all the other bits of details that it had. So here goes the submarine piece. More texture work with the rock. Wasn't happy with how that plate was embedded in the ground. Trying to make the toes not fully embedded in at this point, just trying to sort that whole connector. Slightly off camera, but you get the general idea of what I'm doing. There we go. Put the scatter on. Now, there'll be no tufts obviously because it's Mars. So all our details is rubbles, bits of scenic items. That's all we've really got to play with. Pushing that rubble in, and you can see it just disguises the edge between the clay and the panels. It's very much like a railway ballast. I think I know there is some railway ballast you can get. It's a bit from like Luke's APS, do a really good mixed aggregate for basing. There's lots of different sizes if you don't live anywhere near a decent gravel source. There we go, just scatter a load of the sand in between his feet. And the base, the model itself isn't fully in the middle of that base. It's definitely further back, which is fine because obviously his guns are really far forward. And it gives us that space to make a bit of a diorama. So that's okay. Let's spritz inside that corner and get some more sand and stone and stuff in there. Here we go, get the sand in. Just going to throw it all in there this time. Move it around, push it in where we need to. Just the larger bits I'm pushing in. There's no point pushing in the sand itself, it's just going to stick to your finger. And like I said, the water PVA glue mix will set it all in place. Just clean his toes a little bit. So these are the only real areas we need to put some scatter in at the moment. And the good stuff about natural sand, as you can see here, is just the variance in grain size. It's got to be in scale, so you need really fine grains. You don't want just all big massive boulders, but because this is like a rocky area, we can have a bit of variance. It just adds to that realism rather than just having it all like sandpit sand. There's the rough base, but there are areas we need to fill in here and there. It's funny listening back as I'm recording this voiceover where I'm complaining about the mess on my desk. I remember there was just sand everywhere and bits of clay. So now we'll remove him, give us better access to the areas around his toes. So you see he's already stuck on quite well. We'll remove that panel that I snapped off earlier. Free him from the base. That's a better idea of what's going on. So because the bottom of his foot is raised, I want to put a bit more of the scatter underneath the central part. Just in case anyone looks under there, they can see there is also stuff there. I want to try and keep the outside edges of the toes free from clutter, just so we can glue it down nicely without any obstruction. So I'm going to see if I can find any of the bits and pieces that we can add to this now. I don't think I've come across any decent pieces, but you can just see how much of a nightmare it is. So I'm just going to skip this part because it's a bit pointless. I say skip it, I'm just going to watch my madness as I look through this box and discover there's not much that I can pick out. That's actually a panel from the Orc Stomper kit. But there a bit from a Chaos Rhino. More pipes and cables from the Mechanicum set for the landscape. I consider using them. I don't think I end up using them. There's some more of those Zinj Industries pipes. Submarine antennas there. Now that box at the end is just full of bits I can't even categorise. I bought off eBay a bag of random basing parts, which was just for scatter really, but some of them are quite useful. Like there's a leg there which I think is off a, I don't know, is it like a Sentinel or something? Some Chaos leg. Nope. Quickly decide that there's nothing really suitable for this. There is obviously the risk of using too many pieces when you're doing basing. You don't want it unless you're making a junk pile. Not always handy. Right, back on with something being sensible. So the pieces I've got were the cables that usually hang underneath those platforms, but I'm not particularly happy with them. You put one loose cable in there. Those mouldy plastic ones, no good. So yeah, once this is dry and all sorted out, what I'm discussing here is after I've glued all the rubble on with the PVA mix, I'm just going to draw a line around that the plastic base and just cut it off nicely. So I don't put the barbed wire in on this part of the video. The barbed wire will be on the next one because I remember drilling it through the dried clay. So we need to do a little bit more of the detail work here though. We're going to glue in these power cells. And put the next one in. Now this was a pain to get glued in because I wanted it to sort of connect to that fuse box on that brown piece of scenery there. It just wouldn't glue in. And it probably would have glued in if I was being sensible. I was just using too much movement to get everything positioned correctly. But we get there in the end once we get the pliers in position. So at this point I'm going to start talking about part 2 of this video series. Part 2 will consist of all the paint work. You see how we go around painting it nice and quickly but effectively. You won't see the PVA mix because it was such a mess. I needed to do that off camera, but it's basically maybe an inch of PVA in a bottle, the rest with water, maybe 1/6 PVA to water, the rest 5/6 water. Mix it all so it's nice and smooth, and then I used a pipette and just pipetted it all over the surface. Let that dry. Once it was dry, all the rubble was fine, it wouldn't move anywhere. I also had cut the base as well, I think, before the next part of the video. But I'm thinking, we need that other barrel in there. Now, the barrel I've currently got in my hand has a little spout on it, and we're going to later on have that barrel leaking from that spout. So you'll see how we do that as well. So we'll get that in position as well. But we're nearly done in this video. So I'm talking about trying to protect that top coat at the moment. The top part of the nicely painted barrel, the storage container which we want to keep. But when I come to painting it, I didn't really need to mask it. I was just careful with where I was spraying. So give it another bit of water all over the top. There's no real reason to do this at this point. I just wanted to make sure it was the same level of wetness all over. So like I said, I'm now going to put this in a nice cold, almost damp room so it dries slowly. The slower this dries, the less chance of cracking and any issues will appear. It took nearly a week to fully dry, or to dry enough to be able to do the next stage anyway. But it was rock hard once we did it. So here's where I'm discussing dropping the PVA with the pipette. But yeah, this is about the end of part 1. Hopefully we'll look forward to part 2 shortly. Thanks everybody, and see you on the next episode.